Brielle Jensen didn't realize she'd lost her entire life until she reached into her tote bag and came up empty. No wallet. No ID, no Metro card, not even a crumpled receipt. No, 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 she muttered, frantically patting every pocket in her coat as she stood frozen on the corner of 5th and Elm. Her heart pounded. She'd only stopped for a quick coffee before her internship interview. 1 cappuccino and a kvass at Café Mirabelle. She replayed the moment in her mind, the cashier, the receipt, grabbing her phone, and felt her stomach drop. She must have left it on the table. Without thinking, she spun around and ran back the 2 blocks, weaving through the morning crowd and ignoring the ache in her ballet flats. The bell above the café door jingled as she rushed in, scanning the tables. Nothing. Her table was already cleared. "I think I left my wallet here," she said breathlessly to the barista behind the counter. Pink leather zipped with a tiny scratch on the side. The guy frowned. "Sorry, we didn't find one." Her heart sank. She backed away slowly, trying to think. Without her wallet, there was no subway ride. No ID, no interview. She stepped outside, leaned against the brick wall, and closed her eyes. "Excuse me," a deep voice said beside her. She opened her eyes and turned. A tall man in a dark navy coat stood there, holding something in his hand. "This yours?" he asked, her breath caught. There it was, her wallet, worn pink leather, gold zipper, scratch on the side. "Yes," she gasped, grabbing it from him. She opened it. Everything was still there, her ID, her cards, even the $5 bill she'd stuffed in the back. "Where did you find this?" "You left it on the table," he said. "I was sitting right behind you. I tried to catch you, but you were already gone." Brielle looked up at him fully, now noticing the sharp lines of his jaw, the perfectly styled dark hair, the piercing blue eyes. He looked like someone from a luxury magazine ad, handsome, expensive, and completely out of place at a neighborhood cafe. "Well, thank you, seriously. This would have ruined my entire day," she said, still catching her breath. "Interview?" "Yeah, internship, marketing firm." "Midtown," he glanced at his watch. "You've got about 20 minutes if you take a cab." "I can't," she stopped. "I mean, I was going to take the subway, but..." She held up the wallet. "I guess I can now." "I'll get you there faster," he said, already walking toward the curb. A sleek black town car pulled up the moment he raised his hand. Not a regular cab, a car service. Before she could protest, he opened the door for her. "You coming?" Brielle hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" He gave a small shrug. "Maybe I like saving people from disasters." She bit her lip, then climbed in. The leather seats were warm, the car smelled like cedar and something expensive she couldn't name. He slid in beside her and tapped the driver's shoulder. 5th and Lexington. The car pulled into traffic. She glanced at him. "I'm Brielle, by the way. Graham Jensen." She blinked. "Wait, Jensen?" He nodded. "Don't worry, no relation." She laughed, and he smiled. The car ride was fast, and the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. When they reached the building, he stepped out and opened the door for her again. "Good luck, Brielle." She looked up at him, a little stunned. "Thank you, really?" He nodded once and got back into the car. She turned and ran into the building, heart racing, but not just from nerves anymore. She didn't expect to see him again, but 4 days later, while she was grabbing lunch at a food truck outside her internship, a voice said behind her, "You made it through the interview." She turned, heart skipping again. Graham, he wore a charcoal suit this time, tailored and crisp, and he looked like he'd just walked out of a boardroom. She noticed the way people glanced at him as they passed. "Do you eat here often?" she asked. He nodded. "Sometimes I need a break from boardroom salads and overpriced sushi." "You work around here," he tilted his head. "You could say that." She narrowed her eyes. "What do you do?" "I run a company." "Which one?" He paused, then said, "Jensen and Reeve." Her eyes widened. "You're the CEO of Jensen and Reeve." He gave a small nod. "You're my boss's boss's boss," she said slowly, stunned. "Wait, we're the marketing firm that just landed your account." "Small world." She stared at him. "Why didn't you say something before?" He shrugged. "Didn't want to make it weird." "It's already weird," he laughed. "Fair." She blinked, trying to process it. This man who returned her wallet, who got her to her interview on time, who bought lunch from the same food truck as interns, was a billionaire CEO. "What are you doing here now, honestly?" he said. "I wanted to see you again." She stared at him. "Why?" Because I haven't stopped thinking about you since you ran out of that car like it was on fire. Heat rushed to her cheeks. He stepped closer. Let me take you to dinner. Somewhere with chairs and no paper plates. She hesitated. Is this allowed? What? Dating your intern, he grinned. I checked, no policy against it. She raised an eyebrow. You really looked. I really did. She bit her lip. Okay, fine, one dinner, he smiled. Friday, she nodded. Friday came faster than she expected. When the car pulled up outside her building, she was already waiting, nerves buzzing. The driver opened the door for her, and she slid into the plush back seat. Graham was already inside, wearing a midnight blue suit, no tie, shirt unbuttoned just enough to make her heart flutter. You look. He paused, eyes sweeping over her in the black wrap dress she'd borrowed from her roommate. Stunning, she blushed. You're not so bad yourself. The restaurant was on a rooftop, glittering with string lights and candles. A jazz trio played in the corner. Every table had a view of the skyline. The waitress didn't hand them menus, just asked if they had any allergies, and returned with a 5-course tasting menu and wine that probably cost more than Brielle's rent. Is this your usual Friday night? She asked, eyeing the gold-plated cutlery. He leaned back in his seat, watching her. Not anymore, she looked up. Graham, he leaned forward. I know this is fast, and you probably think this is crazy. A little. But I don't do this. I don't take girls to rooftop restaurants. I don't find excuses to visit food trucks. I don't return wallets. She stared at him, pulse quickening. But I wanted to do all of that for you, her breath caught. I don't want to scare you off, he added quickly. But I also don't want to pretend I'm not completely into you. She took a sip of wine, her hands slightly trembling. I don't understand it either, she said softly. But I haven't stopped thinking about you either. He smiled then, the kind of smile that made her chest ache. That night ended with him walking her to her door, his hand brushing hers, the quiet stretch of silence between them humming with electricity. He stepped back, but not fully. Can I see you again? She nodded, breathless. Yeah. I'd like that. As he turned and walked away, she leaned against her door, her heart pounding in a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. She'd lost her wallet at a cafe, and somehow she was starting to think she'd just found so much more. Brielle stepped into the Jensen and Reeve Tower a week later, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor as the elevator whisked her to the 28th floor. She had barely adjusted to the surreal fact that the same man who had returned her wallet was now orbiting her world in ways she couldn't have predicted. The internship was demanding her days, filled with pitch meetings, client decks, and researching campaign analytics. She buried herself in the work, but her thoughts strayed more often than she liked to Graham. She hadn't seen him since their dinner on the rooftop, though his name seemed to echo from every corner on memos, on conference calls, in passing conversations between executives. She pressed her keycard into the reader outside the conference room and entered, expecting another mundane strategy session. Instead, every head turned toward the man standing at the front, Graham. He didn't look at her right away. His focus was on the screen behind him as he spoke about brand vision, market saturation, and international expansion. But halfway through, he paused mid-sentence. His gaze swept the room and landed on her. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. After the meeting, he lingered by the panoramic window while the others filed out. Brielle moved to follow them, but his voice stopped her. Can you stay a minute? She glanced back. Sure. When the room emptied, he turned. I didn't know you were assigned to this campaign. It's been a recent switch, she said. One of the junior associates left last minute. You handled yourself well today. She clasped her hands tightly in front of her. Thank you. He studied her, then took a step closer. You're avoiding me. I'm working. I didn't say you weren't, she swallowed, her voice quieter now. It's complicated. I'm not asking for uncomplicated. His voice was low. I'm asking for honest. She crossed her arms. This isn't just dinner anymore, Graham. You're everywhere. And I worked hard to get here. I don't want to be the girl who got special treatment. You haven't, he said evenly. You got here on your own. If anything, I'm the one wondering if I deserve to be around you. She blinked, caught off guard. Why would you say that? Because everything in my life is measured, every risk, every move, every meeting. But the moment I saw you again, I stopped calculating." She didn't know what to say to that. The silence stretched between them until he broke it. "Walk with me." They exited the conference room and took the private elevator down to the lobby. He led her through a side corridor to an underground parking level she hadn't known existed. A matte black Aston Martin sat waiting, the kind of car that belonged in a Bond film. She stared. "Are we going somewhere?" He opened the passenger door. "Unless you have a 3 o'clock meeting." "I don't," she said, already climbing in. They drove past the city's edge, the skyline shrinking behind them. Silence filled the car, not tense, but weighted with questions neither of them had voiced yet. After nearly an hour, he pulled into a narrow driveway that curved upward into the hills. A gate opened silently, and beyond it was a glass and steel house perched on a cliff, overlooking the water. She turned to him slowly. "This is your home," one of them. He parked and got out. She followed, trying to ignore the way her pulse thrummed. Inside, the house was open, minimalist, and filled with warm light. Art lined the walls, originals, not prints, and the scent of cedar and citrus drifted from somewhere unseen. He led her to the back terrace, where the horizon stretched wide and blue. "No one knows I come here," he said quietly. "Why bring me?" "Because I wanted you to see the part of my life that isn't in meetings or headlines." She moved to the edge of the terrace, gripping the smooth railing. "You live in a different world, I know. And I still don't understand why me." He stepped behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "I've met people who wanted what I had, the title, the lifestyle, the power. You didn't want anything from me, not even when I had your wallet in my hand. You looked at me like I was just a guy." "You were," she whispered. "I was," he agreed. "And for the first time in years, I liked who I was in that moment." She turned to face him, her voice soft. "You scare me." "Why?" "Because I don't trust easily, and it's fast, and I can't afford to fall into something I can't climb out of." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Then don't fall, walk step by step with me." She searched his face, trying to find the cracks, but there were none. Only sincerity and something deeper. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. "I'm not asking for promises, I'm asking for a chance." She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand. It was a small thing, but in that moment it felt enormous. He curled his fingers around hers. They stayed there until the sun dipped below the horizon, throwing gold across the water. Later, when he drove her back, neither of them spoke much. But when the car stopped outside her apartment, he leaned closer. "I don't want to rush you. But I won't pretend I don't want more." "I know," he paused. "Would you come with me to the charity gala next weekend? It's formal, black tie, and very public." She hesitated. "Is that a good idea?" "I think it's the only idea that makes sense to me right now." She nodded slowly. "Okay." He brushed her hand with his thumb and then stepped out to open the door for her. As she disappeared into her building, he stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the door close behind her. Inside her apartment, Brielle leaned against the wall, eyes closed. She had no idea where this road was taking her, but she'd just taken another step. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel lost. Brielle had never worn anything like it, a floor-length gown of midnight silk that shimmered like water under moonlight, every seam tailored to her exactly. The box had arrived that morning with no note, just a card embossed with the logo of an exclusive designer she'd only ever seen in the pages of fashion magazines. She hadn't told Graham her size. She hadn't needed to. Now, standing in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, she felt like she was peering at another version of herself, confident, composed, utterly transformed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she fastened the delicate clasp of the earrings that had come nestled in the same velvet case, their sapphire glint matching the deep hue of the dress. When the car pulled up outside her building, it wasn't the understated town car from before. It was a vintage Rolls-Royce, black with silver trim, the kind of vehicle that turned heads and silenced sidewalks. The driver opened the door with a nod, and inside, Graham was waiting, wearing a tuxedo so sharply cut it looked like it had a gravitational pull. "You're breathtaking," he said quietly as she slid in beside him. I feel like I'm in a dream, she replied, glancing at the opulence around her. You're not, he said, his voice low. But I wouldn't mind if you stayed in mine for a while. They didn't speak much as the car wound through the city toward the gala. The silence between them was easy, charged with something that didn't need to be spoken. When they arrived at the venue, a historic mansion-turned-event hall, photographers had already clustered on the wide steps, flashes erupting like fireworks. As soon as Graham stepped out and reached for her hand, the cameras doubled their frenzy. He didn't flinch. He simply led her up the steps with calm assurance, his hand never leaving hers. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and soft candlelight. Strings of fairy lights twined around marble columns, and a quartet played near the grand staircase. Waiters moved between clusters of guests offering champagne on silver trays. It was the sort of evening reserved for headlines and high society columns. And Brielle was standing squarely in the middle of it. She leaned toward Graham, keeping her voice low. You didn't tell me there would be press. I didn't plan for them, but they follow noise, and tonight apparently we're it. I'm not used to this kind of attention. He looked down at her. You don't need to be. Just stay next to me. They moved through the room like a current, people parting with nods and subtle glances. It wasn't long before someone stopped them, a woman in a crimson gown with a neckline sharp enough to draw blood. Graham, she said, her voice dripping silk. I wasn't aware you were bringing someone tonight, he smiled politely. Brielle Jensen, meet Caroline Vaughn. She's on the board for the foundation. Caroline's eyes flickered over Brielle, assessing, calculating. Jensen, any relation? No, Brielle replied, her tone even. Just a coincidence. How charming, Caroline said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. Graham cut in smoothly. If you'll excuse us, Caroline. I promised Brielle a dance. He led her away before another word could be exchanged, guiding her to the edge of the dance floor as the quartet shifted to a slow waltz. Friend of yours? Brielle asked as he took her hand. Not exactly. More like someone who likes to remind me of the world I'm supposed to fit into. And I don't, he pulled her closer. You're the only part of my life that doesn't feel like an obligation. They moved in slow, deliberate circles, the music threading around them like silk. Brielle had never danced like this before, formal, graceful, every step in time with his. But it wasn't the coordination that made her dizzy. It was the way he looked at her, like she'd somehow become the axis his entire night rotated around. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, she murmured. What do you mean, this us? It's been weeks and it already feels like everything's changed. I'm trying to stay grounded, but I feel like I'm floating. He slowed their steps slightly. I felt it the second I saw you again. That something was going to shift. But what if it's too fast? Then we slow down, but we don't walk away. She searched his face and for the first time allowed herself to fully believe the sincerity in his eyes. Later that night, after the dancing and the speeches and the sea of socialites had thinned, Graham led her outside to the terrace. The city spread beneath them, lights glittering like stars turned upside down. He leaned on the railing beside her. There's something I need to tell you. Her heart gave a small lurch. Okay, I've been offered a deal. A merger that would move the company's headquarters to London. She blinked. London, I haven't accepted, he added quickly, but it's a major opportunity. It would change the structure of everything. And you'd go. If I do, it would be permanent. The wind picked up slightly, brushing her hair back from her face. When would you have to decide? Soon, within the month. She looked out over the skyline, her throat tight. What does that mean for us? I don't know yet, but I didn't want to keep it from you. You deserve honesty, not half-truths and postponed decisions. I appreciate that, she said quietly. He turned to face her fully. But I also know this, I'm not interested in building a future that doesn't include you. The words hit her with more weight than she expected. I need time to think, she said. Not because I don't want this, because I do, but I need to know what it means for me outside of you. I can't lose myself in someone else's world. You wouldn't, he said firmly. That's not what I want. She nodded slowly, her emotions roiling beneath the surface. Then let's figure it out. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch lingering. We'll figure it out. Together, by the time the car pulled up to her apartment again, the city had softened into the quiet lull of early morning. He walked her to the door, his hand warm in hers. "I meant what I said," he told her. "This isn't just a moment for me, Brielle." "I know," she said, voice barely above a whisper. She watched him leave, her heart heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Inside, she slipped out of the gown carefully, folding it like it was made of glass. For the first time, she wasn't just a girl who'd stumbled into something extraordinary. She was a woman standing at the edge of a life-changing decision. And in the silence of her apartment, she realized she wasn't afraid of the fall anymore. She was afraid of what it would mean if she didn't leap. Brielle stood on the tarmac, the wind tugging at the hem of her coat as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting the city in molten gold. The private jet beside her hummed quietly, its door open, stairs waiting. She hadn't packed luggage, she hadn't planned on being there at all. But when Graham's assistant had shown up at the office hours earlier with a sealed envelope and a single word tonight her heart had known before her head caught up, she hadn't spoken to Graham since the gala. Not because things had soured, but because they hadn't. And that terrified her more than anything. The depth of what they were building, the way it had taken root so quickly and so deeply, left little room to breathe. She'd needed space, time to recalibrate, but distance hadn't made her want him less. It had only made her understand how much of her heart had already been handed over. The flight was short, not international, not even cross-country. Just a quiet hour north, to a place she didn't recognize until they drove through the winding roads flanked by towering birch trees and emerged on a bluff overlooking a glassy lake. "This way," the driver said, gesturing toward a narrow path lit with low lanterns. She followed it on instinct, her boots crunching against the gravel until the trees parted and revealed a small wooden dock stretching into the water. At the edge, wrapped in the fading orange light, stood Graham. He turned slowly when he heard her steps. His coat moved slightly in the breeze, but his expression was still, waiting. Brielle stopped a few feet from him. "You flew me here. I needed to talk, and I didn't want to do it with walls around us." "What is this place?" "My father brought me here once when I was 11. We only stayed one night. It was the last time I saw him before he left." She hadn't expected that. "Why here now?" "Because it's the one place I've never brought anyone to, and I didn't want the next chapter of my life to begin anywhere else." She felt her breath catch. "Is that what this is?" "The next chapter," he nodded. "I turned down the London deal." Her eyes widened. "What?" "Yesterday, I walked away from the merger, but it was everything, the expansion, the opportunity." "It wasn't everything," he said. "It was just more of the same. More suits, more boardrooms, more cities where I don't know the name of the street I'm living on." He stepped toward her. "But you made me see something else, that there's more to build than empires. That building a life with someone might be the most valuable thing I could ever do." Emotion rose in her throat like a wave. "You didn't have to give it all up for me." "I didn't. I gave it up for me, but I stayed for us." She swallowed hard. "I was scared, I know. I didn't know how to trust something that felt that real so fast. I thought I needed to protect myself." He reached for her hand. "You did, and you still can, but love doesn't mean losing yourself. The people who told you it did were wrong." The wind rustled through the trees behind them, and the water lapped gently against the dock. She looked down at their hands, his palm warm against hers, steady. "I want to be with you," she said quietly. "But I don't want to be swallowed by your world." "Then we'll build a new one." She looked up. Together, he let go of her hand just long enough to reach into his coat pocket. When he pulled out the box, she froze. It wasn't elaborate, it wasn't flashy. Just a smooth, black velvet square that he held between them as he looked at her with a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I wasn't going to do it like this," he said. "I thought about making it extravagant, jetting you to Paris, planning a rooftop dinner. Something worthy of a headline." She smiled faintly, heart pounding. "But then I remembered the first time I saw you," he said. "You were panicked, breathless, standing on a sidewalk with your world falling apart, and I knew exactly what that felt like. Because I've lived most of my life trying to prevent that feeling, but you didn't need saving, you just needed someone to help you breathe again." He opened the box. Inside was a ring platinum, simple but stunning, with a single oval-cut diamond set on a thin band that caught the last of the evening light. "I don't want to be your rescue," he said. "I want to be your partner, your safest place, your loudest cheer, your quietest peace." His voice dropped. "Will you marry me, Brielle?" She stared at him, her vision blurring. "You're sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she laughed through the tears. "Then yes, yes, I will." He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. She reached for him without hesitation, wrapping her arms around his neck as he lifted her off the ground, spinning her once beneath the fading sky. When he finally set her down, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he whispered. She smiled. "I love you too." They stayed on the dock until the stars emerged, dotting the sky in quiet celebration. No cameras, no press, just two people who had met by chance and chosen again and again to stay. Weeks later, they stood in a garden surrounded by close friends and the soft rustle of spring wind. The ceremony was intimate, elegant, and deeply personal. Graham wore a navy suit, his tie undone just enough to feel like himself. Brielle walked down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like the night he first told her she was stunning. They exchanged vows beneath an arch of white lilacs and blue delphiniums, hands trembling with emotion, but voices steady. "I promise to never let the world get so loud that I forget your voice," she said. "I promise to hold your hand when things are easy and tighter when they're not," he replied. They kissed under the open sky, surrounded by laughter and the soft clinking of glasses. And for the first time, Brielle didn't feel like an outsider in someone else's story. This was their beginning. Days turned into weeks, and they built a home filled with late-night tea, music echoing through the hallways, and spontaneous dancing in the kitchen. Graham traded global meetings for local outreach, launching a foundation with Brielle focused on mentorship for underrepresented young entrepreneurs. She left the internship, not because she had to, but because she wanted to chase her own vision, building a boutique creative agency that would partner with companies who believed in heart as much as strategy. They worked side by side sometimes, across the table from each other in their sunlit home office, feet tangled beneath the desk. Other times, they were in entirely separate cities, cheering each other on from afar, but no matter where they were, they always found their way back. One evening, while unpacking a box of books, Brielle found the old pink wallet she'd nearly lost that day outside Café Mirabelle. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the worn leather, the tiny scratch on the side. Graham walked in, drying his hands on a towel. "What's that?" She held it up. "The thing that started everything." He leaned against the doorway. "Still think it was an accident?" She smiled. "No, I think it was fate and perfect timing." He crossed the room and tugged her gently into his arms. "You changed my life. You gave me one I never thought I could have." They stood there in the quiet, surrounded by unpacked boxes, half-drunk tea, and the knowledge that sometimes the smallest moments of forgotten wallet, a stranger's kindness could lead to everything you never knew you needed. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the floorboards, Brielle Jensen knew she hadn't just found her way. She'd found her home. The sound of rain tapping against the wide windows filled their home, soft and rhythmic like a lullaby. Brielle curled her fingers tighter around the mug in her hands, the steam rising gently from the tea she'd forgotten to drink. The lake below blurred under the drizzle, its surface silvered and still. Behind her, the fire burned low in the stone hearth, casting golden light across the floor. Graham was finishing a call in the adjacent study, his voice low, steady. Even when he wasn't speaking directly to her, she listened, not because she needed to, but because it grounded her. There was a steadiness to him, a kind of quiet strength that never demanded attention but always drew it. She set the mug down and walked through the open archway that linked the rooms. He was still facing the window when she entered, his phone already set aside, his hands in the pockets of his trousers. He turned as she approached, the tension in his shoulders easing as soon as his eyes met hers. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. He nodded. "Just confirming the board meeting for next week. They're making the official transition announcement." She tilted her head. Are you ready for that? I am. Letting go of the CEO title doesn't feel like a loss, it feels like space. Space to build something new, something better. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. You've already started. His thumb brushed along her knuckles. You know, I used to think building meant expansion, more markets, more influence, but lately it's been about subtraction. Removing noise, making room for what matters, she smiled. It's funny. I used to think success meant proximity to power, now I think it's about ownership of your story, your choices. She paused. I never told you this, but before I met you, I was planning to leave the city. He blinked. Really? I had a list, cities I might move to, jobs I might take. I felt like I was fading into the background of someone else's life. And now I feel like I'm standing at the center of my own. He pulled her closer, his hands settling at her waist. I don't think I've ever told you how proud I am of you, she laughed softly. You're allowed to say it more than once. Then I'll say it every day. He kissed her forehead. We've come a long way from a lost wallet. She leaned into him, her voice muffled slightly against his chest. That wallet was the best mistake I ever made. They stood like that for a while, the rain quieting outside, the fire flickering steadily behind them. Eventually, they moved to the living room, curling up on the couch beneath a thick throw blanket. The television was on, but neither of them was watching. Graham shifted slightly, his gaze fixed on something far away. There's something else I've been thinking about. She turned to him. What is it? I want to sell the Manhattan penthouse. She blinked. Seriously, he nodded. It's a beautiful space, but it belongs to a version of me I've outgrown. She considered that. Where would we go when we're in the city? I've been looking at a brownstone in Brooklyn, something with character, a real kitchen, maybe a garden in the back. Her eyes lit up. A garden, he smiled. I thought you might like that. I don't know what's more shocking, you giving up a skyline view or suggesting you live somewhere with flower beds. I'm evolving, she laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. I love this version of you. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I love every version of you. The days that followed were filled with quiet creation. Brielle's boutique agency launched with 2 new clients, one of which was a startup founded by a young woman she'd once mentored. She spent her mornings in meetings, her afternoons sketching out campaign ideas at the kitchen table, and her evenings tangled up with Graham, their rhythm easy, intimate, and full of laughter. Graham stepped into a new role too. Not as a figurehead, but as a mentor, focusing on impact initiatives, funding scholarships for first-generation entrepreneurs, and consulting with nonprofits that aligned with his values. He no longer wore suits unless he absolutely had to. He preferred rolled sleeves, bare feet on wood floors, and reading financial reports with Brielle's head resting on his lap. One Saturday morning, while she was watering the potted herbs on the window sill, he came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What if we took some time off? He murmured. She turned her head. From what? From everything. A few weeks, somewhere quiet, just us. She set the watering can down. Where would we go? There's a villa in the hills outside Florence, belonged to an old friend. It's empty, waiting. She turned in his arms. Are we allowed to disappear like that? We've earned it, she smiled. Then I'm in. They left 2 days later. The villa sat on a hill surrounded by lavender fields and olive trees, the stone walls covered in ivy, the windows open to the warm Italian breeze. Mornings were spent walking through quiet villages, afternoons with books and wine beneath the olive branches, and nights with limbs entwined beneath linen sheets, laughter echoing off ancient walls. One evening, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon from the terrace, Brielle reached for his hand. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone back for my wallet that day? He looked at her, eyes warm. I would have found you eventually, she laughed. You sound very sure. Because I am. Some things are inevitable. She turned to fully face him. I don't think I ever told you what I whispered to myself that morning, right before I walked into the cafe. What? She hesitated, then grinned. I said, God, just give me one sign today that everything's going to be okay. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. You were always going to be okay, he said. But I'm glad I got to be part of that. They stayed in the villa until their skin was kissed by sun and their hearts threaded tighter than ever before. When they finally returned to the city, it wasn't to the penthouse, but to the brownstone Graham had quietly purchased in her name alongside his. The garden was overgrown, the kitchen needed work, but the bones of the place were beautiful. They spent the next year restoring it together. By the time the first spring arrived, the garden bloomed with tulips and climbing roses. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and fresh espresso every morning, and the walls were filled with photographs of places they'd been, people they'd helped, and love that had deepened into something unshakable. One evening, as they sat on the back steps watching the fireflies blink between the lavender bushes, Brielle rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss the old life?" she asked. He thought about it. "I miss the view sometimes." "But not the loneliness," she nodded, threading her fingers through his. "I don't miss anything because I never had this before." He kissed the side of her head. "You have it now. For as long as you want it. I want it forever. Then forever it is." They stayed like that long after the stars appeared, wrapped in the quiet promise of everything they'd built together, not just the home, not just the love, but the life that had been forged from risk, honesty, and the courage to choose each other again and again. And in the stillness of that perfect night, there was nothing left unfinished. No lingering questions, only two hearts that had found their way to each other and stayed.